Donald Trump is reportedly rethinking his approach to his number one domestic policy issue. Sources tell the Wall Street Journal Trump has become convinced that some of his administration's deportation policies have gone too far, and voters don't like the term mass deportation. The president has told them he wants to see more attention on arresting bad guys and less chaos in American cities. We will have to wait and see what that actually means for ICE and Border Patrol operations. But White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson responded in part saying, nobody's changing the administration's immigration enforcement agenda. President Trump's highest priority has always been the deportation of illegal alien criminals who endanger American communities. The nightcap is still with us. So, Nikki, it's kind of telling that the president has seen what has happened in Minneapolis with the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. He's seen the protests. He's seen how much it's animated people. And he probably also is aware that his numbers are not where they have to be if the president wants to achieve his deportation goals. The politics of this are cratering for him. And he probably forgot that he actually had signs that said mass deportations now at the RNC. And he's trying to juggle that.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think it's a lot to deal with right now.
He's trying to rewrite, again, his campaign policies.
I think it's important to remember that even throughout the first 18 months of this administration, Trump does this every about 4 months. If you think back when these deportations started happening and hotel lobby, the entertainment industry started complaining hey, you're deporting our workers, when farmers and the agricultural industry started complaining, hey, you're deporting our workers. He made this big show about saying, no, that's not who we're going for.
Hospitality as well.
We're going to stop. And it resumed quietly a month later. I think what we're seeing right now is kind of one of those pauses. Clearly, what happened in Minneapolis was terrible to witness, terrible for the administration. Kristi Noem ended up kind of being the sacrificial lamb there. But I do think, as much as the administration is trying to soften its rhetoric around deportations, for Republicans down the ballot throughout the midterm cycle, they're looking back at 2024 and saying, okay, immigration was the thing that I could lean on to motivate my base. Now, you can't talk about the border because the border is closed and that problem has been solved. And if you say that the border is still a problem, you're criticizing the president. So where I have seen that rhetoric migrate to is the sort of explosion we've seen in the last month or so of Islamophobia, of attacks against the Muslim community. I'm seeing a lot of that anti-immigrant rhetoric that was primarily directed at Hispanics throughout the 2024 election cycle is now being transferred onto Muslim communities. And it's almost exactly the same template. They can still use it. They can still harp on the immigration, the othering of communities who are full of migrants without having to necessarily talk about Hispanic immigration and mass deportations.
And the bottom line is, quite frankly, the Muslim American community is not a force in the political world. They're not going to exact a cost the way that Latinos would after being, as you said, attacked for a decade with failed immigration policies and this kind of racist, xenophobic rhetoric. But let me ask you about whether the cosmetic shift of Markwayne Mullin will make a difference. Is his change, is Kristi Noem being fired? Is Markwayne Mullin going to actually bring about a change in policy and rhetoric, or just simply optics?
I think just optics. I think he telegraphed that in his Senate hearing, basically saying that, I think he said something along the lines of, we don't want to be on the front page every day anymore. I think that's his mission statement.
We want to do it, but just quietly. We want to.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like the way Kristi Noem was, doing photo ops in front of prisoners in, prisons. I don't think Markwayne Mullin will be doing that. I think Markwayne Mullin's seen the folly of his predecessor, and it's a pretty easy path to not repeat. What I do wonder, and I don't know that Markwayne Mullin will have much influence on this, but so much of the administration's anti-migrant, anti-immigrant rhetoric comes from Stephen Miller.
Yes.
And I don't know that Stephen Miller is going to moderate in any way, or if the president has even asked him to.
Right.
And so you could say, oh, we don't want to use the phrase mass deportations anymore. You can say we want to tell the public we're only going after the most hardened criminals. But you've already had all this rhetoric about heritage Americans and Western civilization. And you've got Stephen Miller, tweeting off the handle, things that other, public figures would probably not say. And I just don't know that that's the spigot to that kind of rhetoric is going to be turned off just so quickly just because they got a new DHS chief.
Well, to your point, I think it was either today or yesterday, as quiet as the administration is trying to be about deportations, Stephen Miller was in Texas this week talking to lawmakers about how Texas is still their model for detentions and deportations. So, yeah, as they can put whoever at the helm of DHS.
They'll try to have it both ways.
It's going to be Stephen Miller.
Right.
Yeah.
But the polling is already through the floor. Yeah. Like, he's lost a lot of these Hispanic voters. And you look no further than Florida, where you're seeing Democratic mayors in places like Miami and parts of Florida where you haven't for 21 years. So clearly he's already alienated that group. And look, Muslim voters, it's not it's not a huge group, but like in Michigan, where there's a Senate seat, it is a huge group. And so I don't know that you can put the genie back in the bottle. I think he's really reacting to polls. And look, the optics of what happened in Minnesota are still that's months ago. And you're still, there's still it's in the culture. Like, we saw 2 American citizens murdered in cold blood.
I think it's seared into the psyche of the American people, and I think it's going to be an animating factor that I don't think Americans are going to walk from easily. I think it's something that is going to haunt Americans as they go into the polls, to think that Americans were gunned down. And we've seen the videos, right? Yeah. I don't think anyone is really convinced of the narrative that the administration tried to put forward. But it will be interesting to see what happens in Florida if the president, as he has said, we're going to take Cuba next, or I'm going to do something about Cuba next, and see whether or not there's a political calculation in that motivation.